We are continuing on with this series of diving a little bit deeper into some of the most life-changing things that we've learned. Hope this is helpful. Today's topic is 7 things we learned from hanging out with addicts and how that saved our life. Little bit of background. About 8 years ago, I started going to a 12-step meeting. For those of you guys that aren't familiar with a 12-step meeting, this is like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous,
Overeaters Anonymous.
And on the flip side, there's like Al-Anon, S-Anon, which is like the spouses and family members of addicts. And it follows a pretty specific formula. A lot of these meetings are the same. I started going to a sexaholic one about 8 years ago.
I started going to S-Anon about similar time, maybe 7 years ago.
And I've averaged 1 to 2 meetings a week for most of the last 8 years. And it changed my life. This is what we learned. Number 1, these meetings don't start off with how things should be, they start off with how things are. This was really helpful for me because growing up going to church, I always knew that I was not supposed to lie. But the problem was, I lied all the time. And I felt like when I went to church or hung out with family members or friends, I always focused more on what I was supposed to do instead of what I actually did. And that caused all sorts of problems for me. It caused me to be in denial about my lying. And by the way, that was like the tip of the iceberg. There was like stealing, sexual issues, all sorts of confidence issues. There's tons and tons of talk of like, well, this is what we're supposed to believe and know and do. And I said it so much and I focused on it so much that a lot of times I actually thought that's what I was, when in reality I was something else. So going to a place where I could just say who I actually was and what I actually did that week or didn't do that week brought me closer to reality and therefore closer to a solution.
The second thing is it forced me to work on myself. I don't think that was like a natural thing for me. I kind of just I would look at Ben and his issues were so blaring that it was easy to do. But I had a lot of issues underneath the surface that I wasn't looking at. But I was able to look at these issues because the format is such that you only are supposed to talk about yourself.
I think of the prayer request meeting in like a lot of our community groups or Bible studies that we used to be part of, and people would always ask these prayer requests, and there'd be 8 of us, and everyone would say something like, oh, I'd like to ask for prayer for my neighbor who's not a Christian, oh, or my aunt is having heart surgery. And it sounded really unselfish on some level, but then I was like, wait a second, I don't know your aunt, I don't know your neighbor. What about these 8 people here? Is there anything we're really struggling or wrestling with?
Right.
Maybe we should prioritize seeking that. And I think it was actually just a way to not have to deal with and focus on ourselves and gossip about other people.
Well, and there's a belief that we're really not that bad. So why focus on yourself? Like, as long as you don't have the blaring sins, which I don't even know, I guess that's like sexual or drugs or something like
Porn or murder.
Yeah, then like you're pretty decent fella. You know, you don't really need a whole lot of help. And I've learned that that's so far from the truth. The other thing it helped me realize was it was okay and good to take care of yourself. I think when you're focusing on everyone else but yourself, part of what I was believing was I don't need help, but I'm also like not important or valuable enough to need help and to find growth and serenity for my life.
I think from a religious perspective, we were both taught you get saved and you start saving other people.
Yeah.
That's like where you spend all your energy, time, priority. And I didn't even know what we were saving them into because I had all sorts of stuff, but I didn't even know when I was supposed to prioritize it, but I felt guilty for prioritizing it almost.
Yeah, and I learned that working this program was actually a really unselfish thing to do because I was actually getting healthier and more of a person that people would even want to be around and be able to actually get something for themselves if they're around me.
Number 3, desperation is key. The type of spirituality I want to be a part of is the type that can save you from the worst thing. And for me, growing up, I always felt like God was just one of those things that added to your morality. He made you a slightly better person. He asked for a little bit more of you. Hanging out with addicts, these are people that they felt like if they didn't have God or his ways, they knew where they would be, with the prostitute, or in the gutter, or dead, or in prison. And that type of desperation was contagious for me. Because while I didn't have those exact same symptoms, the reality is I need God just as much. If God can't save me from the worst things, if he can't save me from the worst sexual deviancy, or the worst type of violent rape, or murder, or wanting to drink myself to death, or whatever the worst thing you can think of, then I'm not really that interested in him because he doesn't seem that powerful. And I saw, you know, that type of desire and that type of desperation in these rooms. Number 4 is when you really need help, it's easy to focus on the things that you have in common. A lot of people don't understand the anonymous part, anonymity piece of Alcoholics Anonymous. They think it's like for your protection, to keep things a secret. That's actually not the focus of the principle. The focus is so that you can focus on principles, not personalities. So before I share, I would say, hi, I'm Ben, I'm a sexaholic, or I'm Ben, I'm an alcoholic. Cam would say, Cam, I'm an alcoholic too. And what that does is it's not saying that, oh, an alcoholic is all I ever am, but it's saying more than being a banker, more than being a boy or a girl or Asian or a Christian or Catholic, is we're gonna focus on this thing that we have in common so that we can find a common solution. And it was so cool because I would walk into these buildings and there'd be someone that would drive up in a BMW and some homeless guy that would either walk or take a bus. But in the meeting, they were equals. No one cared. I saw doctors share, and I saw people cry when homeless people shared. And it was like, we both need help, was the idea. When
you walked through that door, you left all of your other identities at the door. Number 5, I learned how to listen. There's no crosstalk, which means when someone's sharing, you're not thinking about, oh, what should I say to this person? You're just listening.
At the end, you're not allowed to respond. You're not allowed to say, oh, that's interesting, or have you thought about this? When
you're not focusing on what should I say to this person, you're able to focus on how can I relate to the story that they're telling. And again, that helps you bring it back to yourself.
This principle has been one of the most helpful principles with our 12-step meetings that we have with our family, because there's so much that we as parents feel like when a kid comes to me, I need to offer advice or fix or say something to kind of shame or put them in their place. But in this one meeting, there's this rule where the kids can share whatever they want, and all that we say at the end is thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And I think it creates a safety. I'm more likely to share things when I know I'm not going to give advice. At first I thought I wanted a lot of advice. I was like, oh, that's what's cool. I'll advise you, you advise me. But I've actually never seen a level of honesty and openness that happens. I mean, some people might just cry for their share. And there's no other place for that. Like where someone can just let out what they have inside of them and know that they're not going to be getting some sort of someone looking down on them, basically, and telling them how it ought to be.
I think that this has helped me even in parenting, like the day-to-day stuff. It's taken off the pressure for me of when my child does come to me with maybe something actually really serious. I'm able to just listen to them and know that that might be enough, and that actually might be what they need.
Not only might it be enough, it might be the only thing we can do anyways.
Yeah.
Because a lot of fixing people or kids is an illusion. Like we can't, people can't fix us.
Yeah.
And we can't fix other people.
You feel helpless, so you try to do some lame thing, but maybe you just should be listening.
Number 6, less is more. Most of these meetings that I've met at have been in church basements. They've been with folding chairs. There's no sound system. Sometimes there's shitty coffee. I'll never forget the meeting where we showed up to the building and the building was locked, and we met in the parking lot around the back of a pickup truck, and it was a really valuable meeting. And it was in those moments that I saw with great clarity like what the group was there for and what it was not there for. And a lot of times, a lot of the equipment or the fancy things, they kind of can be a distraction to what's the most important thing. And most of the 12-step groups I've been to, they are bare bones.
And number 7, we are all...
That was a drum roll.
We are all addicts. I really used to believe Ben was worse off than I was because he had an addiction that was called that. It was unacceptable. It wasn't really until about 5 years ago I realized that I had a cleaning addiction. It's even a weird thing for me to say to you because some people might laugh at that. And I remember telling someone, I believe my addiction is just as much of an addiction as someone who is addicted to alcohol. And this person was like, yeah, I don't believe that. I have all of the same symptoms. It's just cleaning, which is like considered harmless and good, and you're supposed to do that. But really at the root of it was what was going on in my heart. It was the same exact stuff as other addicts.
Which that same stuff is that we're all lonely.
Yeah.
We're all struggling with connection with God and others. And we all have areas in our life that we're powerless against facing.
Right. We all are scared and want to control something.
And when we feel that way, we turn to things compulsively that don't always help us and sometimes hurt us. And it wasn't until I started hanging out with addicts that I saw that the addiction was never the point. Like for sex addicts, it was never about sex. Or for alcoholics, it was never about alcohol.
For cleaning addict, it was not about cleaning.
There's always something beneath it that actually is driving it. And the goal is to get rid of the behavior enough so that you can really address the deep need and find that need met. It's easy.
With the right thing.
Yeah, and for me in religious circles growing up, there was a huge emphasis. I don't think it's just religious, but it frustrates me that it's also in religious. There was a huge emphasis on just the behavior. So if you're looking at porn, that's bad. If you're cleaning, that's good. But if you're running from God with doing either of those activities, I'd almost prefer the porn because that is something at least people are aware of has destructive tendencies. You know, the cleaning, people applaud that.
Oh, yeah.
Or there's other ones where it's
laugh
like
at you.
Work addiction. People might, you know, they don't even call it addiction. They're just like, oh wow, he's a really hard worker. When maybe he's just running from God, from his family, from the real difficult things in his life, the pain. And I don't think that makes the addiction bad. To me, it's not a shame to say that someone is addicted to work. It's actually the first step in enlightenment or progress or growth is to say, wow, I'm turning to this thing instead of facing reality and facing God. That probably will not work out best in the long run. This last one though is the most important to me. And I spent time this last 8 years with child molesters, with rapists, with people that have been in prison, with like the worst people that I thought, and I had them in a separate category. I was like, oh, I'm this bad, you're this bad, and I'm hoping to get this good. And hanging out and learning that we're all made of the same stuff, it really changed my viewpoint on myself for the better.
Well, and sometimes those people are probably the closest to God because they know they need God. There's no illusion for them.
I hope this was helpful. This is one of my favorite topics, so it's an area that has helped us out so much. And we found a lot of common, I think, growth in our marriage because you and I have both been working these things separately.
Yeah. Yep.
Thanks. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Stay tuned for episode 467. Here's a little magic video.